just to name a few. The subject of consciousness and the atomic world was at hand. Heisenberg and Bohr approached Einstein with a new theory that the minds of the researchers were affecting the results of the experiments. The mathematics of predictability were not repeatable and reliable enough to explain what was happening. Einstein could not accept this at first because it violated all mathematical models. Years later, he admitted it was happening. Einstein said, "Anyone who becomes seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that there is a spirit manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit vastly superior to that of man." A spirit is not a mechanical force like gravity, electromagnetism, or the strong and the weak forces. A spirit is consciousness. So for Einstein to have made this great transformation can only mean that something convinced him that it was really happening, that the universe is alive, and we are part of it. Did great powers hide the truth about what was discovered at the conference because they knew they could not control us if we knew the secret powers of our minds and collective consciousness? All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force is the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. Max Planck, the father of quantum physics. The secret of mind over matter was known 18 years before the first atomic blast at Trinity Site, New Mexico, July 22, 1945.
Our current science cannot handle consciousness. Although some people like to say quantum physics can explain consciousness, the fact of the matter is that physics cannot deal with an experiment where a human being is involved in the loop. This goes back to the way quantum physics was originally built back in the 19-teens and 20s and 30s. Whenever there's a conscious observer present, he causes a collapse of the wave function. Now, the wave function is a mathematical construct that describes the waviness of probabilities of events at the quantum level. And quantum physics is a set of equations that describe how this wave function behaves. When an observer looks at an experiment, he causes a collapse of this wave function. He destroys information. It basically starts the wave function from zero, and things have to start up again. So an observer right now has a chaotic effect in trying to describe or explain what goes on when a person is in the loop. Currently, our physics right now is incomplete. We cannot deal with a consciousness affecting other physical objects in an experiment. We just don't know how to deal with it. So what you find is that most physics experiments keep observers out of the loop. They'll put a scientist outside the box. He gets to look in maybe at the end to see what the results were. But because his consciousness collapses the wave function, they don't let him in. It's like a bull in a china shop. He messes up their predictions, and they don't know how to deal with it.
We live in a world today where there's a hierarchy of power. There are very powerful people, and there are people with virtually no power at all. What's very important from a biological understanding is every human being is equally powerful in their creative ability to shape the planet. And then you say, well, if everybody is equally powerful, then how did other people gain so much more power? And here's the joke. They didn't gain any power. The reason they became more powerful is they took away the power from us. And that the evolution that we're experiencing right now is to recover that power, because when the entire population is possessing such power, there's more of a likely better resolution and harmony than a world today where only few people are exercising that power. And I really look forward to that evolution when we recover the power we've always had, which means going back and reprogramming our belief systems to own how powerful we are.
human intention can significantly influence properties of materials and the nature of reality.
As early as 1957, Professor Hans Eysenck, then chairman of the psychology department at the University of London, wrote a letter insinuating that there was a gigantic conspiracy involving some 30 major universities all over the world and hundreds of highly respected scientists to silence the truth about what we knew about the powers of human consciousness. After the United States Congress had access to the data from the Stanford Research Institute and from universities all over the country and all over the world, they were terrified of what would happen if we all developed the powers of our minds. It was clear that we could remote view, we could see into the future and into the past, we could find, missing airplanes and anything you can imagine with our minds. And they actually did a smear campaign with the media to discredit what they had discovered, because they didn't want us to know how powerful our minds really are. What is the language of quantum communication? How does the universe communicate from subatomic particles, wavelets, superstrings, atoms, planets, to stars, galaxies, and all living beings? Is there a communicative symphony happening all the time that remains invisible to our current technology and awareness? What if we understood its secret? Oh my God, we would know how to talk to the Creator, nature, science, and each other, and interstellar civilizations. Are we in communication before we meet in person? How do we as human beings communicate with each other? How do we find our true love, life partners, our soul matches, our families, business partners, our careers, teachers, and life purpose? And how do we find God?
Hey, what's going on? I'm leaving you a message. I'm really starting to get worried that you haven't called me back. And I guess, you're not leaving me much of a choice. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you what I've been needing to tell you via voicemail, even though it makes me very uncomfortable to do that.
Yeah, heart disease, the body is not a separate entity, all its different parts just acting alone. There's a mind-body interaction that has a lot to do with the development of disease in general.
I just wanted to let you know that I can barely live without you. I was paralyzed a couple of days ago, and I don't know. I've never really had the courage to tell you that you're the one for me and I can't live without you.
Stress on the brain will cause output of energy into the body that affects all your organs. It seems that some people have the propensity to discharge brain stress into various parts of their body, and certain people channel their distress into usually one place. It's really ironic. Some people get back pain from stress, some people get chest pains from stress, some people get ulcers from stress, some people get back, upper neck and headaches from stress. This is all channeled energy and distress from the brain going to various parts of the body and manifesting as physical findings and signs from essentially brain stress being channeled elsewhere, because the brain, I think, has only a certain capacity to hold on to nervous energy, then it has to discharge it into the body. So there's a definite mind-body connection. A lot of people channel their stress into their heart, and we know that stress and adrenaline that's produced by stress goes into the heart and can affect the heart in an adverse way that can create abnormal heart rhythms, spasm of the arteries of the heart, and clogging up of the arteries of the heart due to adrenaline causing platelets, which are the blood clotting material in the body, to coagulate. Adrenaline does all that, and in addition to spasm of the arteries.
You see, the heart is an electrical organ. It produces by far the strongest source of bioelectricity in our body, up to 40 to 60 times stronger than the second most powerful source, which is the brain. This electrical energy travels through every single cell in our body and in a sense kind of binds the cells together. It's strong enough that it even can be detected outside the body, out into space, beyond the skin. It's not an aura that we're measuring when we do this, or anything like subtle energy. What it is very measurable electromagnetic energy, much like radio waves. And what we found is that the heart produces an electromagnetic field that surrounds our entire body in 360 degrees. And that it can be detected about 3 to 4 feet with magnetometers outside the body. Researchers at the Manager Clinic in Kansas say they've detected it 10 to 12 feet. So regardless of how far it goes, what's interesting is that we produce this electromagnetic field that can be detected, that can be measured with sensitive mainstream medical equipment.
The human nervous system is an electrical energy system where positive and negative ions flow. We can even measure the surface electrical activity of the body at the fingertips using a simple voltage meter in the millivolt setting. Most human beings have far less than 1 volt total, regardless of where we measure along the body. The numbers oscillate due to the numerous electrical pulses in our nervous system. Testing hundreds of individuals, our study has shown that everyone has different voltages at different moments in their lives. Children tend to test around 1/4 of a volt, while adults can range anywhere between 0.5 and 30/100ths of a volt. If we are less than a 1.5 volt battery, how can we broadcast a powerful energy signature? And how can we hear a message that is meant for us? The greatest mind control experiment the government ever did on us is tell us that our minds are not powerful. In the year 2009, I conducted hundreds of voltmeter tests on the human nervous system from age groups from, literally children to teenagers to middle years and to elderly years. I found that all human beings have different millivolt ranges in their nervous system. Our nervous system runs positive and negative ions throughout our body, through our hands and our feet and our chest. Our entire body is being energized by the central nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. People who have medical conditions such as severe depression or nervous system disorders such as MS have millivolt ranges that go between somewhere around 5 and maybe 9 millivolts. Now, to give you a comparison, the average person ranges between 50 or maybe even 30 and 100 millivolts. That's the average person in the average state of consciousness. A millivolt is 1/1000th of a volt. So our body is running between maybe 30 and 100 millivolts optimally. That's when we're really in our optimal range. If there was a way to raise the human body voltage, which is the electricity in our nervous system, to higher levels, that super athletes train to get their nervous systems up to 2 full volts per cell, which is 2000 millivolts, what will happen to our consciousness? Will it be easier for us to project our thoughts to cooperatively affect our reality? Will it be easier for us to apply a stronger signal to the law of attraction? Think of a radio. You know, you're trying to listen to your favorite song on the radio and you can barely hear it because your radio doesn't have enough power. Well, your body is like a radio transmitter receiver. If you don't have enough energy in your system and you're trying to send thoughts out into the universe to cooperatively affect your reality, to attract your soulmate, to attract a business idea, to become more creative, and you don't have enough power in your nervous system, the chances of you manifesting your reality the way you want it to be are going to be much lower. So you need to increase your energy levels first, which you can do by meditation, and you can also do by using, technologies like we're talking about here. Doing a simple experiment. When we get a weak signal on the radio and we place our hands on the antenna, the signal mysteriously improves. This is scientific proof that we are likened to an antenna that receives messages from the beyond. Our future soul match might be trying to broadcast us a message, but if we are not tuned, we will not hear what they are trying to tell us. You either need more power or a more finely tuned radio. Did the ancient stone builders know the secret healing powers of spiritual vibration stone technology? Did they know that stones and crystals could hold memory? At the University of California at Stanford in 1993, scientists were able to store a movie of a hummingbird in 3 dimensions and a separate movie of the Mona Lisa painting inside of a crystal and get it to stay there. If that sounds impossible to you, this is an ordinary sheet of plastic. It's called a DVD. And all it is plastic with a mirror shiny coating on the bottom. A laser bounces through that sheet of plastic, bounces off the mirror coating on the bottom, and sends back the information, a movie, a song, your computer files, whatever you want to store in it, to retrieve it so that you can see pictures, you can hear songs, you can hear voices, and you can see photographs and all of your data files in ordinary plastic. Now I'll give you an example here of what we have. This is stone technology. It's in the same shape as the universe, which is a toroid. It's actually the same shape as the Earth's magnetic field and the same shape as the human eye and the iris. And what we do is we send these stone pendants, which you can wear around your neck and hold in your hands. We send them into a series of 5 quantum energy generators, and we charge them with tachyon energy, which is faster than light energy. And the frequency vibrations of the tree of life and the frequency vibration of the NASA actual sound of the sun. So basically, like little miniature hard drives, we found a way to trap, just like a DVD does, traps a movie or a song. We can trap the healing vibrations of the universe in a stone. Then what we did is we tested people. Hundreds and hundreds of people were tested, wearing the pendant, holding it with the left and the right fingers. And we could clearly find, within seconds, the human body voltage would come to much higher levels. While these amazing stone pendants can raise your vibration, scientifically demonstrated, could this increased energy be applied to broadcasting our thoughts and true intentions, giving us a stronger signal? Super athletes and psychics and healers and telepaths have much higher body voltage than the average person. Dr. William Tiller conducted human voltage studies on human beings who were Qigong masters or healers, demonstrating extrasensory abilities.
50 to 100 millivolts is natural. If you put electrodes on the ear, which is a norm for the body in physiological tests, then you're talking about a few millivolts. But if you're working with a healer, as we did some experiments, copper wall experiments with Elmer Green and I did this back in the 70s, then the healer, you can measure body voltages on the walls, and we found that a healer could increase the body voltage on a wall, reflected, of course, from the body or receive by transmission from the body, 25 volts, 50 volts, 100 volts, 250 volts. We have been able to get signatures of that size. And basically I was very interested in that, and I created a theoretical model that what happens when a healer is projecting healing to someone, that at some place in the body there is a site where the action occurs to bring about this transmission of energy. And when I looked at Elmer's data, he had 5 pieces of experimental data. He had the voltage on the ear, and he had voltage on 4 walls. 1 up front, 1 behind, 1 above, 1 below. So 5 equations and 5 unknowns should solve. And so I solved those equations, and I found that for this particular healer, the source, the primary source, was the Dantian point, just below the belly button.
Is our bioconsciousness likened to a living computer system, having its own power supply, memory, feelings, and the ability to transmit information?
Well, imagine that you yourself have been designed, evolved to be the most positively brilliant quantum level computer processor, solution generator, ever evolved, designed, devised on planet Earth. The huge problem is that over the course of us growing up, most of us have taken on a whole series of computer viruses. So imagine that within yourself you might have as many as 100 major viruses, which are clogging the ability of that computer to function at its most brilliant levels. But on the other hand, imagine if you could learn to clear that processor to the point where it would begin to totally hum, in tune with the quantum field, at such a level of openness and vibratory awareness that it would actually begin to function at the level that it was truly designed to function at.
What we found is that the frequencies in that field, the electromagnetic energy and the frequencies that are in the radiation from the heart, actually change depending upon what we are feeling. Our emotional state influences changes in that electromagnetic signature. For instance, if we're feeling a strong negative emotion like anger or frustration, it creates what researchers call an incoherent spectra in that electromagnetic field. Lots of different frequencies fighting for power. The pattern looks very jagged and irregular, kind of like you'd see if you were looking at a pattern of an earthquake. And we see that kind of electromagnetic signature again when people are feeling these negative emotions. The good news is that we see a completely different kind of feel when people are feeling positive emotions. You know, really heart-based emotions, emotions that have long been metaphorically associated with heart. For instance, if we're feeling real genuine appreciation or sincere care or real compassion, what we see in that field is what's called a harmonic spectra. The frequencies are now working together. They create what's called a harmonic sequence. They're not fighting for power, they're supporting one another. And all these changes occur because of what we do as human beings. The emotional qualities that we are bringing to life affect that field. Now you take that a step further. The field surrounds us in 360 degrees. We're broadcasting that energy, first of all, to our own bodies, but we're also sending it out into space. So in a sense, we are communicating our emotions through an electromagnetic field produced by the heart. So there's a lot more research to be done on this because now we've moved beyond biology into physics. Now we're into electromagnetic fields. How do these fields affect one another? How do they affect each other? These are all interesting questions that we have ongoing research to come up with definitive answers for. And I think it's just the beginning. I think that what we're measuring is some of the densest energy produced by the heart, and that there's another subtle energy component of heart that's far more powerful, far more interesting, and that radiates far beyond just a few feet. And all that will be discovered in the next few years.
Of all the energy centers of the body, the heart center produces the strongest signal. With heart disease being the world's #1 cause of death, and the heart center being the main broadcast power center of the body, we have to nurture and respect it as if our lives depend on it. If we intend to send out a signal to attract a response, and our central power source is damaged, we will be sending out a weak signal. And the question is, do the magnetic laws of attraction hear a weak signal? While we are living at one location on the earth, and the people we want to meet may be in another, how can we communicate with our future soul matches through the field?
Well, the most important thing is doing soul work, meaning putting your soul into the conscious field where your soulmate soul can find yours. And that doesn't have to do with outward things so much as it has to do with accessing your soul. And a lot of us, that can be confusing because we may think our emotions are our soul, but usually our emotions are tied into, past issues and psychological triggers. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about nurturing your soul in some way on a daily basis, or bringing it out, finding ways that will trigger it so that it expands outside of your aura and into the conscious field where you would have other souls. And that creates a line of communication or a signal so that the other soul, when they're in that field as well, will recognize you, and then ultimately you'll meet physically. But in order to meet your soul mate, we are talking about a spiritual soul bond. We're not talking about bonding on a personality level or a cultural, social, or religious level. It's all about the soul bond. So you need to be doing soul work on a regular basis to bring that intention out there.
The field is the sole governing agency of the particle. What he meant by that is the field, the invisible forces, are the sole governing agency of the particle, matter. So it says human beings as physical matter are actually governed and shaped by the field. And this is what we're beginning to learn. Reading the field is very important for our survival.
The human body has an aura of electromagnetic light energy that radiates far beyond the boundaries of our physical body. Doing another simple experiment with our radio antenna, we can see that a weak or static radio station comes in more clearly just as our hand comes near the antenna without even touching it.
Arizona Senate Democrats pleased that President Barack Obama will be in Phoenix next week to speak about the economic stimulus plan. Minority Leader Jorge Garcia of Tucson says the emergency funds will hopefully offset spending cuts that the Republican-controlled legislature are imposing to balance the state budget.
It would put a lot more money into Arizona's economy.
This is simple scientific proof that our field is interacting with the field of the radio waves at a distance. Our consciousness transmits information into the field, but how powerful are our thoughts and feelings?
It's important to clear your field so that you are creating a very intentional signal. By that, one of the things is not dating or having flings, not holding on to semi-relationships that have your foot in one foot in and 1 foot out. You want to clear all of that because that will actually create confusion in the line of communication. It'll make it like static, and it will also bring people around you that can misguide you, or you may think that they're the ones, but it'll be confusing you because you're sending mixed messages. So they may be partially what you want, but they're not in fact your true soulmate because you're sending out mixed messages about what you want. So it's vital to clear your space on that level. If you're looking for an intimate soulmate relationship, totally clear that space and make it open and available to actually find the true soulmate that you're looking for.
As all 7 of our body's energy centers send out living light waves of different frequencies and amplitudes, they are also sending out our personal information. This means our inner spiritual architecture represents a personal signature of our knowledge, experiences, desires, feelings, true intentions, and deepest thoughts. This signature will be met with a response, whether we are conscious of it or not.
One of the ways to understand the mystery of attraction, the mystery of what pulls some people together, why one woman will turn a man on and that same woman will not turn another man on, why one man will just make a woman open up in feelings of love, and that same man will be nice to another woman, but she doesn't have those same feelings to her. There's a actual dynamic between the different energy centers in the body. If we look at the 7 basic energy centers, they're like circuits in the body. And we're not all, as individuals, we're not completely whole in that all those circuits are connecting all the time. For example, I just spend time with some people and suddenly I naturally feel smarter. I feel brighter. That's because their circuits are activating a part of my circuitry that makes the energy flow more completely. Often people go to a spiritual teacher and they'll put them on a pedestal because just in the presence of that person, they feel so spiritually more awakened. One of the higher centers starts to open. Well, it's not that that person sitting there would have that effect on everyone, nor does that person necessarily have all their circuits together at all. It's just that they happen to have 1 or 2 circuits that are open that complete another person. In a similar way, it's like a man being turned on to a woman over here and another man not being turned on. This woman literally activates some circuitry inside of this man that completes his energy center, so now energy is flowing to the sexual center. There's always been known in the past the muse. The muse would inspire the writer. If he didn't have the muse, that little circuitry that allows him to express what's inside of him simply couldn't be connected. So that's what the muse does. So in a variety of situations, our relationships activate certain circuits inside of ourselves that connect up the different energy centers. Generally, when we find someone that we're in love with, someone that we want to share our life with, that's what we often call a soulmate. And that's someone who activates the circuits in our heart. They activate us to the eternalness of love. And so when we interact with this person and we're open, not when we're shut down, but when we're open, we feel this part of us that can love them forever and wants to love them forever. And that's what we often define as a soulmate. They may not be the one that opens our mind or opens our sense of creativity or gives us confidence. They're going to be the one that opens our heart. It could be they can open 3 levels or 2 levels or all 7 levels. And that's the uniqueness of every relationship. Never look for perfection in a person, but to know that the perfect relationship for us is someone who stimulates in us, when we're feeling centered, they stimulate within us a feeling, a knowing that this is a person I'd like to share my life with. In their presence, I become a better person.
The people we meet and the spiritual experiences we attract by coincidences may not actually be coincidences. They may be the results of our personal broadcasting.
So when you want to make contact with your soulmate in the conscious field before actually meeting them in person, it's when you're actually doing your soul work on a daily basis that you want to put those intentions and feelings into the field. What I mean is, like during meditation or prayer, you want to put the feeling tone of wanting to meet your soulmate into that space. Or if you're writing about your inner emotions and desires, you want to put that feeling tone there. Or if you're just nurturing yourself, put the feeling tone of having a soulmate relationship in that space, in that soul work space, which will go into the conscious field. What you don't want to do is put preconceived ideas into that space about what your soulmate looks like, who they are, all those things. It has to do with control. And when you're really ready for your soulmate, you're ready to let go of your control, because a soulmate is in fact a soul bond. It doesn't have to do with all those outward, conditions or ideas. It has mostly to do with that soul connection. So that's why I say you put the feeling tone in that special space more than anything.
As human beings, each one of us is characterized by our own vibrational frequency, which is a reflection of the proteins in creating our biology. The significance is that as individuals with individual frequencies, there are some people whose frequencies are more complementary or more matching than other individuals whose frequencies are quite different. The relevance to this is that matching frequencies or complementary frequencies interact with each other and actually, in the terms of physics, interfere with each other. And as two very closely related frequencies come together, their interference patterns result in an enhancement of the field itself, a powering of that field. So this is called constructive interference, and allows two individuals that are closely related to communicate across this field. The most characteristic and easily understood communication is that usually occurs between a mother and her child. Which are of course very much connected to each other, and in fact the child has cells from the mother in it because of the developmental processes that occur during fetal development, and more importantly the mother has stem cells from her child in her body as a result of fetal development as well, so that both the mother and the child are actually sharing cells with the same receptor frequencies on them. And as a result, and this is very interesting because mothers will report this, that they will know if something is wrong with their child no matter where their child is on the planet. That this is a very, very common experience, that if a child is hurt, a mother will know this even if she's on the other side of the planet. This is just a demonstration of the fact that the communication between individuals can be picked up through this vibrational field, and specifically through the receptors of identity on the surfaces of our cells. Well, the significance of that is it doesn't have to be your own child. It's people that you actually complement with out in the field can communicate across these distances. And very interestingly enough, when people come together as couples and are together long enough, they can actually begin to use this field as communication mechanism without even using words. So it's very funny sometimes to hear a couple that has been together for a very long time communicate with each other with totally incomplete sentences, with no subjects or verbs, and yet both of them understanding the communication while an outside party has no idea what they're talking about. And that is because we have two levels of communication, the field and via the particle, via the body. So it's interesting that we're now beginning to recognize the field's effect, and this is very, very critical for both our communal organization as well as our own physiological expression, to recognize the power of the vibrations and how they can influence our own biology.
Brainwaves are indicative of consciousness, and consciousness can travel as a wave. These waves can be reduced to numerical values of wave particles, amplitudes, frequencies, spin, codes, and information. Professional numerologists study these numbers and codes. They study the numerical values of the position of the stars and the planets at the time and date of our birth location, and our name. Is it possible for advanced numerology to determine our relationships and possible future outcomes?
Numbers have harmonic and disharmonic relationships just like music does. So you can listen to certain music and you know, my gosh, I don't like it, it jars me, there's too much disharmony. And the same goes for numbers. So let's say somebody has a prevalent amount of 3s, 6s, and 9s in his or her blueprint, and they meet somebody with a lot of 4s and 8s. They're not going to get along as readily as with somebody who also has the creative 3, 6, and 9s in their blueprint. So you can see, and in the same way, there are certain numbers that are magnetically attracted to each other. Those are the numbers 4 and 8. So they have almost a fateful relationship to each other. So it gets quite complex as we look at the song and the numbers song of each person, and you actually create two blueprints, put them together just like a musical. You take two melodies or harmonies and you put them together, and what does it create? Does it create something jarring or not? And certainly with people, we can see how their numbers will either work well together, be compatible, or be completely harmonious, just because numbers are a resonance. They describe something that is key to who you are.
Your soul energy is a unique signal that is broadcast into a field where your soulmate's soul energy is being broadcast as well. So that is where your souls are bonded when you have a soulmate, and that's where you're already having a relationship with your soulmate, whether you're aware of it or not. And whether you're aware of your soul desires and feelings, or if you're not, is irrelevant, because you're already bonded with your soulmate on that level. And the goal is to become aware of yourself on that level so that you can broadcast your soul into the conscious field where your soulmate can do the same, and that will trigger and speed up the process of finding your soulmate in a physical plane, so that you actually are meeting them and are able to have a relationship on a day-to-day basis.
Our DNA represents our entire genetic blueprint. It is here that everything about us is represented by letters in the DNA matrix code language. Our destiny appears fixed because of this unshakable blueprint. Dr. Fritz Albert Popp, the discoverer of biophotons in 1976, proved the origin of these human light emissions are emanating from our DNA, the core reactor from where we are broadcasting our personal energy signature. Dr. Bruce Lipton has made a revolutionary discovery that first proved that the DNA nucleus is not the brain of the cell. Rather, the intelligence center of the cell is the membrane. The membrane receives signals from our consciousness and writes the DNA code. For the first time in history, Dr. Bruce Lipton is proving that we can actually reprogram our DNA if we are dissatisfied with our blueprint, and broadcast a new message about ourselves to the universe.
The fact is that the cell membrane of the human cell actually is an information processor. And what I ultimately realized in 1985 was that that processor had a very interesting and important definition. The definition of the membrane is it's a liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels. When I recognized this biochemical description in 1985, I was very much amused by it, because I said I've heard that exact same definition somewhere else, and actually had to go search for where I heard it or found it. And what I saw was I read it in a book called Understanding Your Microprocessor, a simpleton book about how to use a computer. Basically, the definition, liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels, is the exact same definition of a computer chip. What this all led to was a very simple and yet very profound understanding. The cell is an information processor because the membrane reads the environment and adjusts the biology. The nucleus of the cell with its genes represents a hard disk, and the genes are programs. Our old belief system is that the nucleus and its programs were read-only memory, so that whatever the genes are, that would be our fate. However, the new insights offered revealed that the nucleus of the cell was not read-only, it was actually read-write. So basically, the cell was a programmable device. You'd put it into an environment, it would read the environment, and then adjust the expression of the genes to match the needs of that environment. So taking genetically identical cells and putting one set into a culture with certain environmental conditions caused the cell to program itself as a muscle cell, and a genetically identical cell put in yet another environment, reading the constituents of that environment would lead to the expression of a bone cell. So basically, the cells are programmable in response to environmental information. And one last piece, just to tie it together for all of us to understand, is that if you put a culture dish of cells into an adverse environment, then what would happen is that those cells would actually get sick and start to die. And if you take that very same culture dish and move it into a healthy environment, the same cells would immediately recover and start to proliferate, and the cultures will flourish. The relevance about all this is that we go back to the nature of a human being and recognize that containing 50 trillion cells, the human body is essentially a skin-covered petri dish. If you take your human petri dish body and put it into an adverse environment, it will cause the cells to get sick and to actually begin to die. And yet if you take that same skin-covered body and put it into a healthy environment, the cells will rapidly recover and begin to flourish again. So the important reality is that our state of health or disease is really a reflection of the environment that we live in and the environment that we perceive.
He's like, don't trust me. He goes, I will torment you. And I swear to God, that's what ended up happening. I've been tormented by this relationship.
In each one of us, there are 46 human chromosomes, among which there are nearly 3 billion base pairs of DNA. That means there are 3 billion strands inside of us to store our personal information. If we can rewrite our own hard drive by reorganizing our thoughts, feelings, and higher consciousness, we can reprogram our own personal blueprint to attain any goal we desire. As our personal energy signature broadcasts this new message, we will discover new people in our coincidence meetings. We will also gain new knowledge to apply towards our own enlightenment, relationships, careers, and life purpose. Scientific studies have shown the heart is not only the most powerful center in the body, it is the most intelligent, having the ability to receive precognition. If we can create a coherence with our minds and heart center, we can access our intuition more frequently.
One of the interesting studies that was done here at the Institute of Art Math with our chief researcher, Dr. Roland McCready, was a study on intuition, on the intuitive response. And in that study, they had test subjects that were placed in front of a computer, and they were wired up. They were looking at brain waves, they were looking at galvanic skin response, they were looking at readings from the heart rate variability analysis, and things like that. The test subject would push a button, and there would be a delay before the picture would appear on the screen of the computer. And the computer was randomly selecting the pictures. No one knew, no one could know what the computer was going to select. Some of the pictures were pleasant, and some were horrific. What we found was that in many cases, the body started responding to the upcoming picture, responding in the way it would normally to the upcoming picture, about 6 seconds prior to the picture actually showing up on the screen. 6 seconds prior, the body began to do what it would do if the picture was there. It was a very, very complicated study, a very detailed study, published in 2 parts in the Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine. The data analysis showed something very, very interesting. It showed that when that response began, that the first part of our physiology that was doing sort of the intuitive or precognitive response was actually the heart. The heart was responding before the brain. It began to go through a deceleration process that would be compatible with the picture that was going to come up. About 1.5 seconds later, the brain began to do what it does in regards to that picture. But within the human system, at the physiological level, measuring that intuitive response to an upcoming event, it was the heart that responded first. And as I read the summary of that study, I found it fascinating, because what the summary basically said was that it appears as if an upcoming event is significant or emotional, that we have a tendency to be able to sense that or to respond to it before it actually occurs. And that our biology has the capacity and does in many ways scan for the future events. It's constantly scanning for future events, but that it's something we're not aware of. We don't know that it's there. We don't know that we do it. But the punchline was it would be very useful for us to develop that. And it has a lot of utility, a lot of practicality in how we navigate our lives. And so it's just one study beginning to decode, something that's remained sort of mystical or sort of vague, which is intuition. What is intuition? And I think certainly there's a lot more to go in that area, but this is one study that indicates that there is a response, that the body itself is actually scanning for future events, and that the first responder to that entire process is not the brain, but in fact it is the heart.
We know that our whole biosystem begins to shift in terms of what we in sports psychology have been referring to as being in our zone. So when a person learns to open into that more quantum attuned way of being aware and being present, it's like instead of focusing in narrow band, problem focused, fear-based ways, where we're looking at some kind of threat and focused entirely on a problem, and all our internal organs begin to contract, and thus our emotional system begins to go into overreaction. When we're feeling and emoting, when we're being within that zone space, our internal organs begin to open up. They begin to relax. Our awareness field, instead of being narrowband focused, starts to broadband focus. And what studies have shown is that in that state, we actually begin to process way more bits of information per moment. And when we're in that state, we have the experience as though time is slowing down. Because we know from time and motion studies in movie projection that when we feed more frames of information per moment through a projector, it creates the illusion of time slowing down. So this is often what people experience when they're in that zone state of more quantum field, present attuned awareness. They start to feel like they can make much more effective decisions in a kind of ongoing flow-like way. We've all had tastes of what it's like to be in this zone. Those are those magical times when you have a few hours, a few days sometimes, even sometimes a few weeks, where it seems like you just can't do anything wrong. Everything comes up roses. You're in the right place at the right time, the right information comes to you, you start to feel like you're being guided to make the right decisions. So this is part of what we're talking about in terms of becoming more quantum level attuned.
In 1992, Professor Walter Schempp discovered how atoms communicate with each other over any distance through the field. He discovered in the atom, when electrons are in a higher frequency shell or orbit around the proton, the atom emits light waves carrying intelligent information, similar to the way when we are talking and communicating, our brain waves go into a higher frequency wave state. He found when the electron jumps to a lower frequency wavelength, the atom receives photons carrying intelligent information, as if they are listening, just as when we are listening, we go into a lower frequency brainwave state. The timing of when electrons jump shells to higher or lower frequency orbits is completely random and cannot be quantified by any mathematical predictable formula, likened to random human behavior. There are several other behaviors in quantum mechanics that remind physicists of human random consciousness, as opposed to models demonstrating repeatable and reliable mathematical timing, such as the sun rising every day at the precise expected time, and the 9 planets' orbits around it. In the quantum universe, finding precise timing and repetition of events is very difficult in certain functions of the atom and its components. Niels Bohr and Heisenberg presented to Einstein at the 1927 Fifth Solvay Conference on Quantum Mechanics that the minds of the researchers were affecting the angular momentum of the electron's spin around the proton. This was because different data came in when different researchers were conducting the experiments. The data was always random and could not be quantified in a repeatable and reliable mathematical formula. As far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality. Albert Einstein. In Richard Feynman's book, The Strange Theory of Light and Matter, he tried to quantify the behavior of the timing of which light particles, photons, emanating from a light source would reflect through several layers of glass and bounce back to detectors. Light particles do 3 things when they strike a glass target. 1, they either travel through the glass sheet, or 2, they react and scatter inside the glass sheet, or 3, they bounce back to give us a picture of the sheet of glass. Feynman shined his light source through several sheets of glass, allowing light particles to choose to bounce off of or react to the surface of various layers of glass. He wanted to see if there was a quantifiable formula for which photons would bounce back and which ones would travel through the glass or penetrate deeper and bounce off another sheet of glass, or scatter and react inside of it, or deeper yet, travel through all the sheets of glass. Regardless of the color of light and various other parameters, there was no way to quantify the strange behavior of light and matter. The light particles, photons, always behaved randomly as to what they would choose to do, just as in human consciousness. Could human intention be so powerful that it could tell particles of light, photons, to penetrate through several layers of glass and even solid barriers? PhD psychologist Stanislav Ojak has demonstrated his power of intention over the film plane of a camera. His intention is so powerful, he found he can cause a photograph to appear while the lens cap on the camera is blocking the lens and the film plane from receiving light. He has done this hundreds of times. He has also been able to take pictures with film and cause invisible spiritual phenomena to appear. His film and photographs were analyzed by Kodak Film Laboratories to be authentic and not caused by double exposures or trick photography.
Several abnormalities that began to occur in the photographs. People became transparent or they disappeared, light aberrations, and then entities which appear to be human-like in some form, but not as we would say it was definitely humanoid. And these aberrations went on. So over a period of about 4 years, it's 74 to, it's longer than that. 74 to 1981, accumulated over 5,000 photographs with a 22% anomalous factor in regards to that.
As Stanislav Ojak took mystical photographs of the 1972 Seals and Crofts concert, a large luminous face appears overlooking the band on stage with Cher. Then what appeared to be a band of divine beings of light pointing and perhaps even dancing to their music gazed into our world without us ever even knowing it. Could beings of light and even angels have listened to the spiritual music of Seals, Croft, and Cher? Could such beings have even inspired their music to be born?
He took pictures with the lens cap on the camera, so that the radiations that eventually were registered on the film went right through the lens cap, and the lens cap will block electromagnetic radiations. So it definitely was different radiations than electromagnetism, and that's why I've called these things subtle energies. Doesn't mean they're weak, it means they're subtle in the sense that they're very different from the energies associated with the 4 fundamental forces that we know from orthodox science.
Dr. Claude Swanson's synchronized universe model may help explain how we can see into the invisible dimensions of the universe and explain visions and apparitions, and how we can interact with those dimensions, but more importantly, to prove that they are part of our reality.
I developed what I call the synchronized universe model as a way of trying to expand current physics to account for a lot of these psychic phenomena, paranormal phenomena, besides the types of things we've been talking about, which involve communication psychically and affecting things at a distance. You also have other abilities that the yogis have demonstrated, that certain adepts in China, the Qigong masters, have demonstrated, things like walking through walls, levitation, teleportation, things that in the West we laugh at and we call them science fiction, and yet there are people who have demonstrated reliable abilities to produce these effects. So our science needs to be able to account for how this is possible. And the synchronized universe model says basically that matter is not what we thought it was. They're not like little billiard balls or even little quantum points moving around, that when we say there's a particle at some place, a piece of solid matter, what that really involves is an energy exchange between that charge or that particle and all the other particles in the universe. That things are moving very rapidly on the very small scale. This is a scale smaller than the size of the electron, down to more like the Planck scale, which is the basic smallest scale that physics tries to describe. At that scale, there's a synchronization that has to happen, that particles only see each other when their velocities are lined up with each other. In other words, at a very small scale, all the particles are moving very rapidly at the speed of light. So in this system, at a very small scale, and this is part of of special relativity, part of our current physics, at very high speeds, a particle only can kind of look in the direction that it's traveling. So if it emits a photon, it has to be in the direction that it's traveling at that instant. Off in the distance would be some other particle. If they're going to interact mutually back and forth, that particle also has to have a velocity lined up with the first one. So the primary interactions at this very small scale would involve particles with velocities that are aligned at that moment of interaction. A moment later, their velocities have changed because they received an impulse from one another. And what this leads to is the only stable solution of this system is when the particles end up being synchronized with each other. The ones that interact consistently on the average over time are the ones that take on little orbits at very small scale, down to Planck level, which are synchronized. You could have many, many other systems of particles that have some other synchronization, either a different frequency of oscillation or a different phase, so they're in some other part of their orbit, so they're looking in a different direction. Those particles would not, on the average, see the first set of particles. So they would be invisible to us, or we might see them occasionally as quantum noise, and that may well be the origin of quantum noise. So you end up with a system which you can think of like a stack of sheets of paper, and one sheet of paper is like our physical universe. The particles on that sheet of paper are the ones that are synchronized with each other. We call that physical reality. That's what our current physics tries to explain. That's where our laws are applicable. But you could have many, many other sheets of paper with these other parallel systems that are synchronized a little bit differently. Now, what raising the gauge and paranormal phenomena and torsion and these other forces that I've been talking about, what they do is they shift our little sheet of paper. So now we start to move down and dip down and interact with other parallel systems. And that's what happens when you can start now to, instead of being limited to a 4-dimensional reality, your dimensionality now can be 5, 6, or 7 dimensions as you interact with other parallel systems. When that happens, strange things become possible that were not possible before.
According to the synchronized universe model, when our own frequency synchronizes with a parallel universe or dimension, it allows us to perceive it in the form of a vision, powers of levitation, miracles, knowledge, enlightenment, and even healing. Our bodies are made of atoms and subatomic particles. 99.9% of our body weight is comprised of protons and neutrons, which are then made of hexagons of 6 quarks, each made of dual pairs. Among the quarks are the mysterious strange and anti-strange quark. They are called strange because they have the ability to randomly just disappear from the core of the atom and then strangely reappear. There is no mathematical model to quantify the timing of when and why they will do this. Is there a connection to the behavior of the strange quark and human consciousness? Knowing that we are also made of a significant percentage of strange quarks, that portion of us is dematerializing and rematerializing at random all of the time. No one has been able to determine where the strange quarks travel to, other than the fact that they disappear into other dimensions and reappear. Do they travel to other dimensions to gain information or to communicate at a distance? This behavior demonstrates that part of our consciousness does travel into other dimensions. Can this help explain communication at a distance and mental telepathy? In the 1970s, President Carter, the CIA, and the Air Force used two psychics trained in remote viewing to locate a lost Russian Tu-22 bomber, which no other forces could find. The remote viewers gave blind latitude-longitude coordinates that led Air Force officials to point their satellite cameras deep into the jungles of Africa, precisely where the Russian Tu-22 had crashed.
The significance of the case where Carter talks about how remote viewers were used to find the missing bomber that had gone down in the jungle shows that remote viewing can be very accurate and can be useful. Now his comments about the case were a little bit of an oversimplification. There was more than one remote viewer actually involved. They do it several times to check one another. But the fact is that remote viewing, number one, can be very accurate, and number two, was really used for important cases over an extended period of time. And even though they claim that it's finished and there's no more remote viewing going on, that's what they said before they admitted that this program was there too. So you can make your own conclusions about that. The point is that consciousness really can be used to give us information that might otherwise be unobtainable.
Later, in 1979, Congressman Charles Rose, then chairman of the House Subcommittee on Intelligence Evaluation, reviewed the U.S. government's secret psychic spy program. He then warned that if the Russians had this ability and we didn't pursue it further, we would be in serious trouble.
Well, there's certainly plenty of evidence that the out-of-body programs were going on, the remote viewing programs were going on. What has been made public is the 20-year remote viewing program that was started by the CIA in the 70s that physicist Hal Puthoff and a couple other people started, and they found out from their early experiments they could go into laboratories in Russia. One of the first laboratories was at Semipalatinsk, which the CIA at that time had been unable to look into. They saw a building, large structures, a lot of activity, but they could not tell what it was being used for. And so one of the first successes that started the program was when a man named Pat Price remote viewed the inside of the facility. He saw overhead cranes moving along overhead outside of the building that had railroad tracks on each side of the building. He saw these huge steel spheres that were being cut with special types of welding techniques. They were foot-thick steel sections of spheres. We had no way of, at that time, of welding such large structures, but they developed a technique to do so. And by using his remote viewing ability, he figured out that these were going to become large underground spheres to capture the energy from explosions and then use that energy to make a beam weapon. This was part of the Russian beam weapon program. And of course, in the 80s, Ronald Reagan started the Star Wars program in an effort to counteract some of this technology. But the first inkling we had that the Russians were involved in this was Pat Price's remote viewing back in 1974 or 75.
While the United States nuclear weapons program, peak in evolution, was a 15 megaton nuclear bomb. The Russians were far superior, testing a 50 megaton hydrogen bomb on October 30th, 1961. Was Russian psychic espionage into the United States secret weapons program instrumental in allowing them to gain the advantage? Today, with the Cold War at its end, Russian psychic research is used for mostly peaceful means. Konstantin Korotkov is a professor of physics at St. Petersburg Tech University in Russia. He is the inventor of the world's first camera that can see deep into the human aura's energy field and information band. It is called the GDV. The computer software reads the data the GDV provides on an individual's auric field. It can see breaks in the energy field, early signs of damage to organs, and changes in the field due to higher states of consciousness, the amplitude of energy coming out of all 7 energy centers, how well the 7 energy centers communicate with each other, and even mental telepathy and healing.
So it was really a very interesting time because we were able to organize a research laboratory, a research center outside of the city in some remote place. We took a house. In this house we put all possible equipment that we were able to think of by that time. And we've been selecting and inviting people who was really talented clairvoyants and talented psychic people. And then we trained them how to operate with each other, how to deal with telepathic communications, and we've been measuring all this process. So it was many sessions like this, several years. It was very interesting results, and everything we published secret reports on this, of course. It never been published in any journal, but we have proven that telepathic communication with people is really possible. Wow. And it was done on very precise scientific basis. But our approach was different from approach of Russell Targ or some other researchers in the world. First step was to select specific people, to find out people who can do something and who communicate with each other. And I am absolutely sure that really effective communication comes between people who are really attuned to each other, who have this very, very special entanglement to each other. It may be men-women, it may be men-men, it may be women-women, it doesn't matter. It's not a gender difference. It is a topic of, I would say, spiritual interconnections. And if they have it, then they may be trained how to interact with each other. So from our point of view, when we've done these experiments, and we are doing these experiments up till now, it is very important to select people, to train them and attune to each other. Then it may be effective communication.
Do we receive messages from others without even knowing it?
This was a study to show is it possible to send and quantify, measure energy of healing, loving energy, sending. So if we send loving energy to another being who is not directly in front of you, but in another space, will they receive it? And if they receive it, how does it show? Wow. That was the purpose, and this was done with a team of researchers in Slovenia. So here we see that you've got the person who is sending energy. This is the right side, is sending of energy, and on this side is the receiving of energy. So from the right side, when you talk about, because the emotional heart is on the right,
Mm-hmm.
it is sending, so there is a little burst, and of course these bursts are captured.
And it's separate
on
from the body. It's
and
leaving, this burst is leaving the body.
Indeed.
Oh, that's amazing.
And the receiver is receiving it. And look at the shape of that too.
How far away are they physically from each other during the experiment?
2 buildings.
2 buildings?
2 buildings.
So this burst of energy traveled 2 buildings and went to
this person who was the receiver.
And this is documented scientifically as biophoton emissions.
Yes, yes.
If we attempt to send someone we are tuned into a message with our mind, will they hear it? Will they receive it?
Protocol where we have instruments on both people, both sender and receiver, and they physically situated in different places, and it may be in different places in Moscow and St. Petersburg, or Moscow to St. Petersburg, or Himalaya to Moscow, Nepal to Moscow, Venezuela to Moscow. So we did a lot of experiments of this kind. In any situation we have time that is related to astronomical time, and it's all now possible by GPS to correlate all this. And we were able, and we are measuring moment of sending emotion, because we are sending not images, not some pictures, not letters, but we are sending emotions. And the aim to detect those emotions on the other end. So we are measuring sending and response from biophysical measurements. This is electroencephalography, electrophotonics, and balancing platform. So we can really detect the moments of sending and receiving. And in all our experiments, it demonstrated that it is no time shift.
Not zero.
Zero.
Instantaneous
Zero.
action at a distance.
Absolutely. Instantaneous effect.
As new science builds a strong case for mental telepathy that is faster than the speed of light, how will this instantaneous communication at a distance change our views and knowledge about how powerful each and every one of us really is?
That after all our experiments on telepathy, it became clear that in principle you can contact any person in the world if you can attune yourself to this particular person. And of course it needs some training, it needs some imagination, you should be trained how to do this, but in principle it's not very difficult. And I don't like, for example, to make telephone calls. For me it's boring to press buttons, then it's busy line, then it's again busy. So when I need to contact someone, I just contact this person in mindset, and they ask person to call me, and it works very well. So it's people usually call and contact somehow, and it works really brilliant.
Could a telepathic message be sent from the moon back to Earth? In 1971, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell believed the powers of the human aura and mental telepathy were so profound he conducted an experiment while he was on his way back to Earth from the moon.
Astronaut Edgar Mitchell, one of our team of 2 astronauts who were the last group, I think, to walk on the moon. This was the 3rd group to walk on the moon. On his way back, decided to do a psychic communication experiment. He didn't tell his superiors about it, but he'd arranged with several psychics on the ground back here on Earth to try to send them psychic messages about cards. There's a set of cards called the Zener cards, which have patterns on them, and during several intervals on the way back from the moon. He was 200,000 miles or more from the Earth at some of those times. He would send these signals back to psychics on the Earth. When he got back, he compared what he was sending with what they'd picked up, and the answers that they had received were accurate enough. They were well above chance, and they were showing that ESP was working even over those large distances. So at our present time, it appears as though that we don't know of any limits in terms of distance or time for psychic communication.
Subtle energies all go faster than light. Now, I'll ask you to visualize a reaction equation, as if you've got a blackboard in front of you, and I'll write mass with arrows back and forth to energy. That is basically what we've done for the last 400 years in orthodox science. And the connection link is Einstein's E equals mc squared. Well, now we want to expand traditional science to include human consciousness. Our experiments show that works now in this world we live in. But we don't all agree what consciousness is. So let's not ask what consciousness is, let's ask what consciousness does.
Astronaut Edgar Mitchell found that consciousness has a better quality signal in space. Scientific studies seem to confirm that consciousness travels instantaneously over any distance. At least it appears that way over the known Earth to Sun maximum distances measured thus far. Dr. William Tiller calculates that due to the fact that consciousness cannot be blocked by any barrier, including lead and mountains of rock, which are capable of blocking the highest frequency gamma rays, consciousness must be of a higher frequency than the gamma ray spectrum to allow it to penetrate these barriers. Also, in order for consciousness to appear to travel instantaneously over Earth to Sun distances, it would have to at least travel at the speed of light squared, which is 34.7 billion miles per second.
Oh, the theory is that they all travel faster than the velocity of light, and that's why they're non-observable. And the magnetoelectric energy, its top velocity from my theory is that it's c squared. So it goes from c to c squared.
Dr. Tiller's new model of consciousness has multi-dimensions. It starts with the second chakra being capable of sending consciousness as coherent information at a frequency beyond the gamma ray spectrum in the magnetoelectric spectrum, with wavelengths so tiny and frequencies so high they could penetrate any subatomic barrier. This level of consciousness can send coherent information at the speed of light squared, or 34.7 billion miles per second. Since the Sun is approximately 93 million miles from Earth, consciousness would appear to travel from the Sun to the Earth in a tiny fraction of a second, 1/373rd.
Whereas if you go to the next level, the emotion domain level, it's sort of c squared to c cubed.
Dr. Tiller's second level of consciousness, emanating from the heart center, allows coherent information to travel at the speed of light cubed, or 64.64 quadrillion miles per second. This is a level of cosmic proportions. As the speed of light travels 5.87 trillion miles per year, and the Pleiades star system is 440 light years away from Earth, or 2.58 quadrillion miles, it would take ordinary light, or radio messages, 440 years to get there. But consciousness, at this level of realization, traveling 64.64 quadrillion miles per second, could travel the 2.58 quadrillion miles to the Pleiades star system in 1/4 of a second.
If you go to the mind level, it's c cubed to c to the 4th.
Dr. Tiller's next level of consciousness, emanating from the crown chakra and higher, allows coherent information to travel to the Andromeda Galaxy, 2.5 million light years from Earth, in a fraction of a second. At this level of realization, we attain ultra-cosmic consciousness. This means, at these higher levels of realization, we can create a dialogue with other galaxies. The answer to how we can attain coherency, total perfect harmonic consciousness in each of our energy centers, is inside of our biology.
Very interesting fact in biology is that no two human beings are the same. And I can say that from a biological expression in regard to a simple observation. If you take cells or organs out of your body and put them into anybody else's body, those cells and organs will be rejected by that individual because their immune system will recognize it as not self. So basically it says each one of us has a self. And what was very interesting in understanding the nature of the cell's nervous system, the relationship of the membrane to the cell, was that on the surface of our cells are groups of antennas or receptors. A group of them are specifically studied by medicine are referred to as self-receptors. And to me that's a very profound title for these particular receptors, self-receptors, receivers of self. So why this is relevant is that these receptors that receive an identity are on the outer surface of the cell. The relevance to that is that whatever the self signal is, it is out in the environment and picked up by these receptors. Significance to my perception in this is that our identities are not within our biology. Our identities are part of a field, and that our biology downloads this information from the field. So the significance is that when we talk about our personal identity, we can talk about that identity isolated and localized with our physical body. But we could also talk about the same information or identity that is present in the field. So for example, Cleve Baxter did some wonderful experiments where he took cells from an individual, put them in a culture dish, and separated those cells from that individual by a distance of 40 or more miles. And what he had was an experiment where he put electrical devices to read the electrical activity of the cells in the culture dish. At the same time, he was reading the electrical activity, for example, the EEG activity of the donor of those cells who was 40 miles away. What he recognized is that if the individual had an emotional experience at that moment, the individual cells would also have an identical kind of activity occur instantaneously at the same time, even though they were 40 miles away. The relevance about this is really very supportive of the fact that the identity is not localized within the body. The identity is part of the field and spread all over the surface of the planet. Significance is this, is that then two people have two physical bodies and they can interact, but they also have two environmental identifications, meaning some kind of energy in the field that is unique to them. Since the field is all entangled and integrated with each other all over the world, that means people are never really separated from each other by physical distances in regard to their personal identity, even though their bodies may be separated. So basically, the nature of people communicating with each other is to recognize that individual identities as vibrational frequencies in a field can interact with each other, especially if there's something called harmonic resonance, meaning the two frequencies share wavelengths together so that when they come together, they vibrate together. And this is how people can actually feel other people that are closely related to them, because they can pick up the vibration of the other individual in that there's a complementarity between them and the person they're communicating with. So the significance is we have an opportunity to interact on a non-physical plane through the identity that is in the field. And this is